I want to show you something. Back in 1995, I created a Jaguar 5-speed conversion for the XKE, or some people call it the E-Type Jaguar, for both the V12 and the 6-cylinder versions of that car. And this casting here is something that I created, and I did cover how I created this casting in one of my earlier videos. What I wanted to talk about was the counterfeits and copies of this casting that are out on the market. I'm not particularly thrilled that somebody actually copied my casting, but the problem with the copy is that it's defective and there's a lot of issues that come up. And in brief, what happened was I had to stop selling this transmission in the UK because a lot of my UK distributors were using my name and selling the copy. And then when the copy had problems, everybody was posting on forums that my transmissions were bad, they had problems. So I decided to stop selling in the UK, and I'm only selling this transmission now to maybe a handful of installation shops in the United States. It's no longer available retail, and it's no longer available to any of the shops overseas because of them constantly supporting these copycat transmissions. And sometimes when people actually copy something, what's really good about it is that they take a little influence from something and build on it. So I'm kind of all for that. I like when people actually use an idea and create something different from it. But in this situation, they just basically made a scan or made a mold of my extension housing, not really understanding why I used certain dimensions or why I added certain things to that particular casting, and decided to have a go at it, as they say. So I just wanted to point out a few things about this particular copy. Some of the stuff they did in manufacturing the copy was actually pretty interesting and pretty neat. But they've had problems with fifth gear noise and some shifting issues. And so I wanted to take the unit apart because I have to repair this one that came in for a good client of mine. Otherwise, I normally wouldn't touch them. And just want to point out in this quick video some of the things and some of my observations, and let me know what you think. Check it out. So what I got here is actually a counterfeit copy of the JT5 transmission I've made. They basically took a complete mold of my extension housing. This is the extension housing that I had manufactured since 1995, okay? And I've got some pieces of my extension housing right over here. And you can see my name was on it. These were some of my prototype extensions that I did back in 95. All sorts of different versions. And where I might have cut the tops off, done some work just to see how the clearances were. But so I was selling these in the UK, and then they decided to copy my unit. Once that happened, we cut off all distribution to the UK. And there's several things. This is in my shop because of some fifth gear noise issues, which are quite common with this transmission, and we're going to dive into it. So if you look at this shifter over here, this is actually a Mustang shifter that they cut the end off and they re-drill the holes. And my casting was designed to use a simple 4-bolt shifter like this. So because they copied the casting and didn't have access to certain parts, what they had to end up doing is making Mustang shifters work, which the offsets and everything were a little bit wrong for this particular application. There's a few things that they did a little different using the casting. Was they wanted to probably get this casting a little bit farther in, so they machined more off the top of the casting here because this is very thin compared to the way I originally designed it. So somebody was in this before because they wanted to find out what was wrong with the 5-speed gear, and they had taken it apart and sent me some pictures with it. So the shift rail mechanisms are off. Some of the stuff has changed around a bit here. I see exactly what they did here. Very interesting. So the complaint was some fifth gear noise, and I could see some very interesting issues here. This is unusual, but a neat approach, I must say. What they've done here is they've taken the original 5-speed gear. They did a beautiful job of grinding gear teeth, but they took the gear and change the tooth profile within the gear by actually regrinding a set of gear teeth on the gear. Let me show you what I mean by that. See, this here is the original gear, and if you look at the number here, it'll say 051 on it. And you can see here that it's got the factory number, this particular gear. Just barely visible. Same numbers here, 051. So if you see, what they've done is they've been able to use this particular gear, regrind it by cutting a new set of teeth in it at a lower pitch line to actually change it into a different overdrive gear by using gear grinding. So it's the same gear. You can see the difference in the actual diameter of the gear because they took this particular gear and ground a new set of teeth on it. So this particular switch used to be a neutral safety switch. It comes with new transmissions, and usually I like to give units a professional look and not just clip the ends of the switch off and leave the switch in there. I'll remove the switch, take out the mechanism for it, and put a proper plug in it. The other thing is these flanged bolts here. These flanged bolts are used on a lot of these top covers, but these flanges sometimes overhang right over here, and they don't allow the transmission to fit flush against the bell housing. If you take a feeler gauge and you line it up here, you'll see that the flange is sticking outside of the surface area that the case goes against on the bell housing. And this will cock the transmission and cause alignment issues. So I removed these bolts and put regular hex head bolts on them in the front, but this is something that a lot of people overlook. They're not really paying attention to how the whole transmission is going to set up as a unit. Let's go see if they left the D10 pin in here, which they did. So there's no reason to have this in the transmission when it's not working. It just chews up the shift rail. So we'll put a regular proper plug in it. So this is a great opportunity to show you the differences in main shaft design. I have to admire these guys because what they're doing is they're utilizing existing parts and making them work again. And I don't take that approach because I don't like annealing and resplining old main shafts. Essentially, this is a Ford T5 main shaft that they just simply lopped off the end and cut it off, annealed it to soften it, and then cut new splines in it, and then reheat treated it again. This is what these shafts used to look like originally. You could see what they did was they just simply cut it off right over here and resplined it. Now, my JT5 shaft, I make a completely new shaft with a larger spline on the back end that's properly formed so that we have a lot more strength to carry in the unit. So you can see on the bottom, this one over here is theirs, and you can see it's that reworked main shaft, and this is how the JT5 main shaft is done, completely on 28 splines, so it's a much more beefier shaft. I haven't seen any of these honestly break, but we don't like to respline shafts. We always make new shafts over here. So this is something that you're getting from these guys. So that's the difference between what we do and what the other guys do. Unfortunately, we are not selling to the UK anymore, so they are forced to stick with using these components. Okay, so a few things I want to point out. First of all, these lock plates were never repositioned again. They left the lock plates dangling open, and this is dangerous because in some of these pieces here, they're bent to the point where they're ready to break off, and this could easily break off in the transmission and cause a big problem with gear breakage because these are very hard pieces of metal. So they never bent the plates back. Usually I put a new plate in when I rebuild them because usually once you bend these tabs back, they usually will not bend back without cracking. It's usually a one-shot deal. But we're going to take this whole plate off anyway and put one of my steel billet plates in place of this anyway, get rid of this junk. The other thing is I want you to take notice here when people do these units, and it's something that I'm a little bit of a stickler for, is they've used this clear silicone sealant on it over here, and what they've done is they've put it over the old sealant, this black stuff, which was the original sealant that was used in the transmission. But they didn't do a thorough job in cleaning this off. The problem is this silicone sealant
and this black sealant, it's not really a silicone, and they react to one another and they can cause leakage issues. So you should always really clean this off completely and thoroughly, nice and clean, before you apply any new sealant. Never apply sealant. Look how easy this stuff comes off. So it's not much work to actually take it off completely, but people tend to be a little bit lazy in their workmanship and do not do a good job of cleaning this up properly. And if you don't clean your area up when you're using these types of sealants, you could be prone to leaks. So it's going to all get cleaned up and a new plate installed, and we're going to do the same thing with these surfaces. Again, you can look at these surfaces, how they left the old sealant still in place and then laid clear silicone sealant on top of it. And that's something that you really want to try to avoid when you build these transmissions. Really give yourself a nice clean surface for the new sealant to really adhere properly to, not leave any old sealant on this. So this is basically lazy workmanship. Nobody wants to do a thorough job of trying to clean things up properly. I'm pretty impressed with the plastic speedometer gear that they've made. It's basically a mold very similar to the gear that we used to make out of steel. We still make our speedometer gears, especially speedometer drive gear, which is this one here, out of hardened steel. And so I don't like using these plastic drive gears internally because the driven gear is metal. And if the angle drive locks up or the cable locks up, it's just going to take this gear out, and then you're going to have to pull the whole transmission apart to actually change one little plastic gear. And with the steel gear, as you can see, you don't have to ever worry about it stripping. And another thing, one of the problems with these gears is that a lot of people who don't know E-type Jaguars, you got to drop the whole engine out of the car to take the transmission apart. So it's more than just pulling a transmission out of the car. It's a pretty involved 12-hour labor cost just to change a plastic gear if it strips. So I've properly prepared the transmission case surface for new sealant. It's nice and clean now. And I've also installed a new billet steel counter gear stabilizer to replace that weak stamp steel stabilizer plate that tends to loosen up on the load and create more end play in the countershaft. So I've got a slight little preload on it, about 4 inch-pounds of drag on this. Feels really good. And now we're going to start assembling this whole case back together again. All right, so you can see I got the new fifth speed set installed with the stabilizer plate there, using their old plastic gear. And that looks beautiful. It's going to be nice and smooth running again. No more fifth speed noise. So over here you can see I put the plug in for the cover. Got rid of that nasty bent up electrical plug. I've got the bolts without the flange in the front, so they clear the front end properly now. Making good progress. So I've got the transmission all back together again. Looks really nice, feels good. I changed the fifth speed synchronizer ring because the factory rings don't really work well. But there it is, it's all back together again.
So I hope you like that. This particular fifth speed gear that was in the unit was actually cut out of an older gear. And again, it's a pretty neat setup, except they probably got the gear data wrong, and for some reason it screams. It makes a lot of noise. It seems smooth, but not smooth enough, I guess. But I must say that the workmanship looked really good, and the whole idea of using an old gear, cutting it down and cutting new teeth on the gear is something I don't think I would have ever done. I would have just made a whole new piece. But nonetheless, it's pretty interesting. One of the problems with 5-speeds, and especially the new 5-speeds, often overlooked, and I'm going to give you guys a tip on this, is the synchronizer ring for 5th-speed gear. The 5th-speed gear synchronizer rings that are available from Tremec right now do not grab the gear properly and actually cause shifting issues not too far down the line. So you buy these new transmissions for a little bit under $2,000, and they start grinding in 5th gear. This is the new 5th gear ring, came with this gear, and if you put it on here, it doesn't grab the gear at all. Now the guy could add a bad clutch, but I've seen this on new transmissions right out of the box that the synchronizer ring doesn't grab the gear. So I tossed the ring and obviously had to change the 5th speed set on this box and put in a better quality ring that actually locks up on the gear and gives the customer a crisper, 4-5 shift or whatever you want to call it. But that's pretty much it. Hope you enjoyed it. Thank you so much. See you soon.